My name is Owen. It's etched on my record, I suppose, somewhere in the Confederacy's vast digital archives. But out here, designations like that slough off like dead skin. Here, what signifies is the mark seared onto my neck, a barcode branded with a laser during intake. It's a designation they gave me when they decided I was defective. A minor genetic deviance, a mutation. It's not visible, not unless you've got a scanner, but it's there, lurking in my DNA. The Confederacy calls it genetic optimization. I call it a life sentence to the dregs. Their world is built on the idea of perfection, a flawless society where everyone fits just so. Except, of course, for those of us who don't. The Earth Confederacy. From a distance you see the hollows of their cities, glittering towers of polished chrome and shimmering force fields. It is a society built on the principles of order, efficiency, and genetic purity. They boast about eradicating disease, poverty, and social unrest. And it's true they have, at least for those deemed worthy. They tell you it's a utopia, a paradise earned through careful curation of the gene pool. They don't show you the other side of that equation, the ones they discard, the ones they push to the margins, out of sight. My defect, a minor misfire in my genetic code, was enough to get me labelled, to shut me out of any real chance at advancement. I was relegated to the bottom rung, working the jobs their perfect specimens wouldn't touch. Menial labour mostly. Maintenance, sanitation, waste disposal, the underbelly of their gleaming machine. I didn't ask for much. An opportunity, maybe. A way to prove I was more than my genetic marker. That opportunity never came. One day, I made the mistake of speaking up. It wasn't much, just a comment during a mandatory civic broadcast, a murmur of dissent about the latest genetic decree. I questioned the wisdom of further narrowing the gene pool, of the potential for unforeseen consequences. It was barely a whisper, lost in the sea of forced affirmations. But it was enough. Their system, so finely tuned to weed out imperfections, caught it. The algorithms flagged me, the enforcers came, and my life changed forever. They told me I was being given a chance to contribute, to be rehabilitated. That was the line, at least. It's all on record, the entire sham of a trial. A faceless tribunal, their voices distorted by the comm system, handed down the sentence. Indefinite imprisonment on the Black Forge, the Black Hole Station. The journey proved their utter indifference toward us. They packed us into the cargo hold of a transport ship, hundreds of us, crammed into a space meant for a fraction of that number. The air scrubbers failed halfway through the journey. The stench of sweat, vomit, and decay was suffocating. They rationed the nutrient paste, and what little water they gave us was foul. Men died, their bodies left to rot amongst the living. We were nothing more than cargo to them, a shipment of undesirables to be delivered and forgotten. I watched men die, their eyes glazing over, their bodies growing cold beside me. I learned then that my voice was a liability, that silence was the only survival strategy. I learned to shut up and shut down. The Black Forge, a colossal cylinder of dull, dark grey metal, eclipsing the swirling chaos of the accretion disk. It orbits a supermassive black hole at the edge of charted space. A research facility, the Confederacy calls it. A dumping ground for the genetically impure is what it is. They claim it's for our rehabilitation, a chance to contribute to the greater good, that we will be involved in the study of the black hole. But we all know the truth. The Black Forge is a one-way ticket. No one comes back. It's a prison, a laboratory, and a tomb, all rolled into one. They say it's designed to harness the black hole's energy, to unlock the secrets of the singularity. They say the warden, a man named Dr. Finch, is a visionary, a pioneer. He's a butcher is what he is, and we're his livestock. The station itself is a monstrosity of engineering. A vast, cylindrical structure, kilometers long, rotating slowly to simulate gravity. From the outside, it looks like a dull metallic needle hanging in the void, dwarfed by the immensity of the black hole. The surface is scarred and pitted, marked by micrometeoroid impacts and the constant strain of tidal forces. My cell was 4 walls of bare, unpainted metal, seams welded shut. A narrow bunk was bolted to the floor, its thin mattress stained and worn. A waste disposal unit was in the corner, its lid sealed tight, the smell of recycled waste still permeating the air. This was my new home. Jasper told me the experiments change you. He's living proof, having seen it happen firsthand. We met during processing, 2 numbers in a long line. He's been here longer than most, survived multiple procedures. His body is a patchwork of scars, his skin discolored in places, stretched taut over oddly shaped bones. One arm is thicker than the other, the hand ending in 3 thick digits instead of 5. But his eyes, those are the worst. Sunken, empty like 2 burned-out stars. He says the experiments burrow into your mind, rewire your brain. They take pieces of you, he rasped, his voice like grinding gears, one hand, 3-fingered, tapping against his temple, until there's nothing left but what they made. He says they do it to make us stronger, more resilient, to prepare us for the black hole's energy, that they want to create something new, something that can withstand the singularity. I look at him, at the ruined body, the haunted eyes, and I wonder if that's my future. Life on the Black Forge is a monotonous cycle of soul-crushing routine. We're awakened each day by a jarring klaxon, a blaring atonal sound that reverberates through the metal corridors. The lights ignite, harsh and unforgiving, revealing the sameness of our cells. The nutrient paste is dispensed through a slot in the door, a grey, flavourless sludge that provides the bare minimum of sustenance. We're assigned tasks, menial labour meant to keep the station functioning. Cleaning, maintenance, waste processing. Pointless, repetitive work designed to break the spirit as much as the body. The guards, augmented with crude cybernetics, patrol the corridors. Ocular implants glow with a red light, scanning, assessing. They carry stun batons, long metal rods that discharge a powerful electrical current. They use them freely for any infraction, real or imagined. I saw one prisoner, a young man barely out of his teens, struck repeatedly for lagging behind during a work detail. The air filled with the stench of burnt flesh as the baton connected. The young man's screams echoing off the walls. One day my number was called. I knew it would be, eventually. It was inevitable. They herded us into a white room, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic. My barcode was scanned, my name appearing on a monitor above the door. I was next. They took me to a lab, a large circular chamber filled with machinery. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting to consoles covered in blinking lights and cryptic readouts. In the center of the room was a metal table, its surface cold and hard. Restraints, thick leather straps hung from the sides. This is where it begins. This is where they start to take pieces of me. This is where Owen dies and something else is born. The warden, Dr. Finch, stood beside the table, his face illuminated by the screens. He was a tall, gaunt man with pale skin. He wore a white lab coat, immaculate despite the grime that permeated the rest of the station. He looked at me, his gaze cold and clinical, and began to speak. He explained the procedure, describing how my genetic code would be rewritten, how I would be made stronger, more resilient, capable of withstanding the black hole's energies. He spoke of progress, of the advancement of humanity. I saw only the cold, hard truth. I was no longer a person. I was raw material. I was an instrument in his grand design. I closed my eyes, took a long, slow breath, and accepted my fate. This is the end, and the beginning. The restraints bit into my wrists and ankles, the worn leather rough against my skin. I stared up at the circular array of articulated metal arms hanging above me, each tipped with a different instrument. A needle, a laser emitter, a microsurgical blade. They looked like the limbs of some monstrous chrome insect, poised to dissect me. The warden, Dr. Finch, stood beside me, a datapad in his hand, his eyes fixed on the readouts scrolling across the screen. His face, normally impassive, held a flicker of something akin to excitement. The robotic arms above me whirred, the sound like metal joints grinding as they extended, lowering the instruments towards my body. A long, thin needle, its tip glinting under the bright lab lights, descended towards my arm. I tensed, every muscle in my body rigid with anticipation of the pain I knew was coming. The needle pierced my skin, a sharp, stinging sensation, and I felt a cold fluid entering my bloodstream. It felt like liquid ice, spreading through my veins, numbing my arm from the inside out. Then the burning started. It wasn't a localized pain, not a simple injection site reaction. This was systemic, a fire that ignited deep within my cells, spreading outward through my entire body. My muscles spasmed, my back arched against the table, the restraints straining against my weight. A guttural scream tore from my throat, a raw, animalistic sound that echoed off the walls of the lab. The datapad in the warden's hand beeped, a sharp, insistent tone that cut through my agony. He glanced at the screen, his lips curving into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. The pain intensified, escalating beyond anything I could have imagined. It felt like my bones were cracking, my muscles tearing and reforming, my very DNA being rewritten. I could feel my body changing, my cells mutating at an accelerated rate. The edges of my vision blurred, the white walls of the room dissolving into a swirling vortex of color and light. I thrashed against the restraints, my body convulsing, screams tearing from my throat, hoarse and ragged. Through the haze of pain, I saw the warden and his assistants. They moved around me, adjusting the machinery, monitoring my vital signs, their movements precise and efficient. They were like surgeons operating on a patient, detached, clinical, completely unfazed by my suffering. To them, I was just a collection of biological data, a set of variables to be manipulated and optimized. The pain reached a crescendo, a blinding, all-consuming wave that threatened to shatter my consciousness. I felt something inside me snap, a fundamental shift in my being. And then just as suddenly as it began, the pain receded, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache and a profound sense of exhaustion. I lay there, strapped to the table, my body trembling. The procedure was over, for now. I was changed. The first experiment had altered me, rewritten my genetic code, set me on a path from which there was no return. I could feel the changes within me, the enhanced strength in my muscles, the increased density of my bones. My senses felt sharper, more acute. I could hear the whirring of the ventilation system, the distant hum of the station's power core. I could smell the antiseptic odor of the lab, the metallic scent of my own blood. But these physical changes were accompanied by something far more disturbing. My thoughts felt fractured, disjointed, my emotions volatile and unpredictable. Bursts of rage, sudden and intense, flared within me, only to be replaced by a chilling sense of detachment. I felt like a stranger in my own body, a passenger trapped in a vehicle that was rapidly spiraling out of control. Over the following days, I was subjected to further experiments. Each procedure was more agonizing than the last, pushing my body and mind to their breaking points. They used radiation to bombard my cells, accelerating the mutation process. They injected me with experimental serums, cocktails of synthesized hormones and gene-altering nanites. They exposed me to extreme temperatures and pressures, testing the limits of my new physiology. My body was twisted and reshaped, my form becoming increasingly monstrous. My skin thickened, becoming rough and leathery in places, smooth and scaled in others. My muscles grew denser, more powerful, straining against my skin. My bones shifted, lengthening in some areas, fusing together in others, altering my skeletal structure. I could feel my humanity slipping away, replaced by something alien and monstrous. One procedure involved being placed in a hyperbaric chamber, a cylindrical metal container filled with a viscous, oxygen-rich fluid. The pressure inside was increased gradually, crushing me, testing the limits of my altered bone structure. I could hear the creaking of the chamber, the groaning of the metal as it strained against the immense pressure. I felt a terrifying sense of claustrophobia, of being trapped, buried alive. Another experiment involved the surgical implantation of biomechanical devices, their purpose unknown to me. I remember the hard steel of the surgical instruments, the searing pain as they sliced through my flesh, the grinding of bone as they anchored the devices to my skeleton. I could feel the implants integrating with my nervous system, sending unfamiliar signals to my brain. The psychological effects of the experiments were as profound as the physical ones. I experienced vivid, terrifying nightmares, waking dreams filled with grotesque imagery and distorted figures. Hallucinations plagued my waking hours, the walls of the station seeming to shift and melt, transforming into nightmarish landscapes populated by monstrous creatures. My personality fragmented, splitting into multiple, often conflicting personas. One moment I would be consumed by rage, a primal fury that threatened to overwhelm me. The next I would be overcome by a profound sense of despair, a crushing weight of hopelessness that left me paralyzed and unresponsive. I lost the ability to feel empathy, compassion, any of the emotions that had once defined me as human. Jasper, during one of my rare moments of clarity, tried to reach me. He spoke of resistance, of finding a way to fight back, to sabotage the warden's plans. He shared his knowledge of the station, gleaned from years of imprisonment, pointing out weaknesses in the security systems, patterns in the guards' patrols. He even suggested ways to exploit the instability of the experimental procedures, to turn the warden's creations against him. His one good hand gripped my arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You have to hold on, Owen," he urged. "Don't let them take it all. Don't let them make you into one of them." But his words seemed distant, muffled, as if heard through a thick layer of cotton. I could barely understand him, barely focus on what he was saying. The changes were too far advanced, the damage to my mind too extensive. I was slipping away, losing myself in the labyrinth of my own fractured psyche. I was becoming the monster they wanted me to be. The man I once was, the man named Owen, was fading, disappearing like a reflection in a shattered mirror. The butcher was remaking me in his own image, and I was powerless to stop it. I was both a masterpiece and an abomination, a product of his genius and a horrifying example of his cruelty. The experiments continued, each one a fresh hell, a new violation. But amidst the agony and the encroaching madness, a flicker of defiance remained. A primal urge to fight back, to resist, even if it was futile. Jasper's words, though distant and distorted by the haze of my fractured mind, echoed in the recesses of my consciousness. He spoke of weaknesses, of sabotage, of fighting back. And so, during my fleeting moments of lucidity, I began to explore, to test the limits of my new form and the confines of this metal tomb. My enhanced strength and agility, gifts from the butcher's table, allowed me to move through the station in ways I never could have before. I discovered that the maintenance shafts, narrow conduits designed for automated repair drones, could accommodate my altered physique. I crawled through these arteries of the station, the metal grating cold and rough against my thickened skin. The shafts became my refuge, my secret pathways through the belly of the beast. I moved like a phantom, a ghost in the machine, unseen, unheard. I mapped the station in my mind, noting the layout of the corridors, the location of the security cameras, the blind spots, the patrol routes of the guards. I searched for a way out, a hidden passage, an emergency exit, anything that could offer a glimmer of hope. But the Black Forge was designed to be inescapable, a black hole in more ways than one. Every door was reinforced, every hatch sealed shut, every access point monitored and guarded. The station was a labyrinth with no exit, a maze designed to trap and contain. Still, I persisted. I began to sabotage the warden's equipment, small acts of defiance, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but vital to my fading sense of self. I used my enhanced strength to damage machinery, to overload circuits, to disrupt the flow of power. I tampered with the genetic sequencing devices, subtly altering the settings, introducing errors into the data. I knew these actions wouldn't stop the experiments, wouldn't bring down the warden's operation. But they were a way to assert my will, to leave my mark on this place, to show that I was not entirely broken. Each act of sabotage was a small victory, a fleeting moment of satisfaction in the face of overwhelming despair. It was a way to spit in the eye of the monster who had created me, a way to say, I am still here, I still resist. My attempts to find allies among the other prisoners were met with failure. Most were too far gone, their minds shattered by the experiments, their bodies twisted into grotesque parodies of human form. They were shadows, haunting the corridors, their eyes vacant, their movements erratic. Some, driven mad by the procedures, attacked me on sight, lashing out with mutated limbs. I was forced to defend myself, using my abilities to subdue them. Each encounter was a brutal, heart-wrenching reminder of what I was becoming. I saw myself in their vacant eyes, in their twisted limbs, in their silent screams. The warden was aware of my actions, of course. He saw everything that happened on his station. He was like a spider, sitting at the center of a vast web, his senses extending to every corner of his domain. He allowed me to continue, observing me, studying my behavior. To him, I was still a specimen, an experiment in progress. He was curious to see how far I would go, how much I could endure before I finally broke. But when my acts of sabotage became too disruptive, he intervened. The guards were sent to apprehend me. They were more heavily augmented this time, their cybernetics more advanced. They carried weapons designed to subdue even the most powerful of the warden's creations, devices that emitted high-frequency sonic pulses, capable of disrupting the nervous system, causing intense pain and paralysis. I fought back, using my strength and agility to evade their attacks. I smashed through walls, ripped doors off their hinges, anything to escape their grasp. But they were relentless. One of them managed to get close enough to use his weapon on me. A wave of agonizing pain washed over me, my muscles spasming uncontrollably. I fell to the ground, my body convulsing, the sound of my own screams echoing in my ears. The pain was unlike anything I had experienced before, a white-hot fire that seared through my nervous system, overloading my senses. It felt like my brain was being torn apart from the inside. Through the haze of agony, I saw the guards approaching, their faces impassive behind their helmets. They dragged me back to the lab, back to the butcher's table. The warden was waiting for me. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His message was clear. Resistance was futile. I was his creation, his property, and he would do with me as he pleased. The punishment was severe. I was subjected to a new round of experiments, more brutal and invasive than anything I had endured before. The warden pushed me to the very edge of my endurance, testing the limits of my transformed physiology. He wanted to break me, to crush any remaining vestiges of defiance, to erase Owen completely and leave only the monster. It was during this time that I finally understood the true scope of his plan. It wasn't just about creating a new species, about harnessing the black hole's energy. It was about power, about control. He envisioned himself as a god, a being of pure energy, ruling over a new order from beyond the event horizon. And we, the transformed, the ascended, were to be his army, his enforcers. The experiments were not just altering our bodies, they were reprogramming our minds, creating an instinctive loyalty to him, our creator, our master. He was not just making monsters, he was making slaves. The realization was a crushing blow. Any lingering hope I had, any belief in the possibility of escape or redemption evaporated. I was trapped, not just within the physical confines of the Black Forge, but within the prison of my own altered body and mind. There was no way out, no salvation. The warden's control was absolute, his plan too far advanced to be stopped. I was a tool, a weapon, an instrument of the very system I despised. My transformation was nearly complete. The man I once was, Owen, the man who valued justice, who dreamed of a better world, was gone, lost forever beneath layers of genetic manipulation and psychological trauma. In his place was a monster, a creature of rage and instinct, its loyalty programmed, its will subverted. My existence was a cruel paradox, a living embodiment of the very thing I had fought against. And the worst part was, I was beginning to accept it. The whispers in the darkness, the voices that urged me to embrace my new form, were getting stronger. They promised power, freedom from pain, an end to the struggle. They promised oblivion. And oblivion was starting to look appealing. The final stage of the warden's plan was upon us. He had used my transformed body as a template, a living blueprint for his own ascension. He was ready to become something more, something beyond human. Even the guards, their augmented bodies normally so stoic and unresponsive, seemed to vibrate with a nervous energy. They knew something momentous was about to happen. Their creator was about to be reborn. The warden gathered his remaining assistants, the few who had survived the increasingly dangerous experiments, the few who were still loyal to him. They were as monstrous as any of his creations, their bodies warped by self-experimentation, their minds twisted by ambition and the promise of power. They had helped him perfect the transformation process, using my body as a test subject. They had refined the formula, fine-tuned the equipment, and now they were to assist him in his own metamorphosis. I watched them from the shadows, my altered senses taking in every detail. I saw the fear in their eyes, the barely concealed trepidation. They knew the risks. They had seen what had happened to the others, to me, but they were too far gone, too deeply entangled in the warden's web of promises and lies. The transformation chamber was located in the heart of the station, a cylindrical room dominated by the massive machine that the warden had designed to harness the black hole's energy. It was a chaotic tangle of conduits, energy collectors, and focusing arrays, all pointed towards the observation window that looked out onto the swirling accretion disk. This was the epicenter of the warden's power, the focal point of his ambition. It was here that he would shed his human form. My role in the procedure was both symbolic and practical. I was the prime specimen, the successful prototype. My transformed body, strapped to a reinforced platform at the edge of the chamber, served as a living conduit, a biological antenna designed to channel and focus the raw energy that the machine would draw from the black hole. Wires, thick as a man's arm, snaked from the machine to my body, connecting to the biomechanical implants that had been grafted to my nervous system. I could feel the energy coursing through me, a torrent of power that threatened to tear me apart. It felt like being struck by lightning over and over again, a continuous jolt that made every cell in my body scream in agony. But I could not move, could not cry out. The restraints held me fast, and the warden's programming, now deeply embedded in my altered brain, kept me compliant. I was his instrument, his tool, and I would obey. The warden, clad in a specially designed suit that would supposedly protect him from the worst of the energy surges, entered the chamber. He moved with a newfound confidence, a sense of barely suppressed excitement. His eyes, usually so cold and calculating, gleamed with an almost religious fervor. This was his moment of triumph, his apotheosis. He was to become a god or a monster. He stepped onto the platform in the center of the chamber, directly beneath the focusing array of the energy collector. The machine whirred to life, the sound growing from a low hum to a deafening roar. A beam of pure energy, drawn from the accretion disk of the black hole, lanced out from the focusing array, striking the warden's platform. He was enveloped in a blinding light, his body silhouetted against the incandescent glow. I could feel the energy surge, a tidal wave of power that washed over the entire station. The warden screamed, a sound of agony and ecstasy, of pain and triumph. It was the scream of a man being torn apart and remade, of a human being transcending his mortal limitations. Or perhaps it was the scream of a soul being consumed by the very forces it sought to control. I watched, taking in every detail of the transformation. The warden's body began to change, his flesh rippling and distorting, his bones reshaping themselves, his internal organs shifting and reforming. His skin turned a metallic sheen, reflecting the blinding light that surrounded him. He grew larger, taller, his limbs elongating, his muscles expanding, his entire form becoming something monstrous and inhuman. As the warden transformed, I felt a strange connection to him, a psychic link forged by the shared experience of the experiments, by the energy that now coursed through both of us. I could sense his thoughts, his emotions, his ambitions. They were amplified, magnified 1,000-fold by the power of the black hole. I saw his vision of the future, a galaxy ruled by him and his kind, a new order of transformed beings, superior in every way to the humans they would supplant. It was a vision of conquest, of domination, of absolute power. And in that moment, I understood the true horror of what he had done. Not just to me, but to all of us. He had not created a new species, he had created a weapon, and we were that weapon. The transformation reached its climax. The energy flow subsided, leaving behind a figure that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The warden stood at the center of the chamber, his body now a towering monstrosity of metal and flesh, his eyes burning with an eerie light. He was larger than any of his creations, stronger, more powerful. He was the apex, the ultimate expression of his twisted vision. He had become the god he always envisioned himself to be. In my altered state, I felt a surge of instinctive loyalty towards him. He was my creator, my master. The programming, deeply embedded in my brain, took complete control. Any lingering vestiges of my former self, of Owen, were extinguished, replaced by a primal urge to serve, to obey, to protect. I was his creature, his instrument, and I would do his bidding without question. It was a horrifying realization, a complete and utter loss of self. But I could not fight it. I was no longer capable of independent thought, of moral judgment. I was a weapon, and he was the hand that wielded me. The last remnants of Owen, of the man I once was, were drowned out by the chorus of the machine and the will of my creator. The warden, in his new form, turned his gaze upon his assistants. They cowered before him, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. He spoke, his voice amplified and distorted by his altered physiology, a deep, resonant boom that echoed through the chamber. He ordered them to prepare the station for departure. They were leaving the black hole, taking their newfound power to the other penal colonies, to the far reaches of the galaxy. They would spread his gift, his salvation, whether the galaxy wanted it or not. He raised a hand, and I instinctively moved to his side, ready to enforce his will. The assistants, spurred by fear and a desperate hope for their own transformation, obeyed. They moved through the station, shutting down unnecessary systems, rerouting power to the main engines, preparing for departure. The warden located the remaining prisoners, the ones who had not yet been subjected to the experiments, the ones who had witnessed his transformation. He ordered me to eliminate them. They were loose ends, potential threats to his plan. And I, his loyal enforcer, obeyed without question. I moved through the corridors of the Black Forge, a monstrous figure, my footsteps echoing in the silent darkness. My senses guided me, allowing me to track the prisoners through the corridors of the station. They were hiding, cowering in the shadows, their faces pale with terror. They knew what was coming. They had seen what I had become. I found them, one by one, and I ended their lives. There was no pleasure in it, no satisfaction. It was simply a task that needed to be done. The station became a slaughterhouse, the silence broken only by the screams of the dying and the sickening thud of my attacks. With the station secured, the warden turned his attention to the galaxy beyond. He established communication with the other penal colonies, using a modified long-range transmitter. He spoke to the other wardens, promising them the same power he now possessed, offering to share his methods, his technology. He played on their greed, their ambition, their own desire for control. And one by one they pledged their allegiance to him, their voices distorted by the vast distances of space, joining his in a chorus of monstrous intent. The Black Forge, once a prison for the genetically undesirable, was now the harbinger of a new order. We departed the black hole, the station's powerful engines propelling us away from the singularity and out into the vast emptiness of space. The black hole receded behind us, a malevolent eye staring out from the darkness, a symbol of the power we now carried within us. I stood beside the warden on the observation deck, watching as the stars wheeled past. I was his enforcer, his weapon, his monster, and he was my master, my creator, my god. There was no hope left, no salvation. The galaxy was doomed to fall under the shadow of the warden's twisted vision. The genetic undesirables, the outcasts, the prisoners, had become the seeds of humanity's ultimate doom. And I, Owen, once a man who dreamed of justice, was now the instrument of its destruction. My past was erased, my future predetermined. I was a monster, a weapon, a tool, and in the cold, empty reaches of space I embraced the darkness. For in the darkness there was no pain, no regret, no memory, only the mission, only the will of my master, only the black hole's embrace.